Hi, I'm Tim Lenton. I'm a regenerative designer, and I've been working recently on the application of the positive tipping points methodology developed by Tim Lenton and the team at Exeter University to resilience to climate incidents in NHS Digital Systems. So this presentation is just a quick introduction to that. There's a longer version of this presentation which goes into a bit more detail, and there's an accompanying report which you can find which goes into all of the detail. So let me find my screen. There we go. So yeah, application of positive tipping points to climate resilience in NHS digital systems. So what are tipping points? So basically tipping points are changes within systems that are self-reinforcing, so it's positive feedback, and that builds momentum towards a widespread impact. This work emerged from work that Tim and the team at Exeter were doing on negative environmental tipping points. Big things like melting of glaciers and turning off of the Gulf Stream and things like that. About changes which are non-linear in nature within systems. And what they did was they turned the established thinking about climate change on its head. The expectation was that you could model how climate change was going to play out, and it would be a nice linear approach. And basically what they found is that systems don't behave like that. Systems are much more abrupt, and changes are much more fundamental. So what they're trying to do with positive tipping points methodology is say, is there a way that we can harness this understanding of how systems behave and use it to positive effect? So the analogy they often draw is this picture of a ball on a curve, and basically the ball wants to settle in the bottom of those basins. So to achieve a system state change, easy for me to say, from one basin to the other takes a lot of effort. Because the ball, for most of the time, it will want to roll back to basin A, and then eventually you'll get it over the tipping point and it'll settle in basin B. And these are the two states of the system. So what they're trying to do with the methodology is understand how can we achieve positive tipping points that are positive changes within the system. The way that they do that basically is to help cultivate agency and intention of people working within the system. And they do that by, you identify potential tipping points within the system. I'll talk a bit about what they are later on. And then having done that, you look at each tipping point and you say, well, what are the enabling conditions around this? What would it take for this tipping point to be triggered? And to do that, you have to understand the feedback loops that can create change in respect to each of those tipping points. Having done that, you then start to think about, well, what are the indicators? What are the metrics that I can use to understand the state of this system in relation to these tipping points? And the final stage of this is really to go, well, what interventions could we make to make these enabling conditions more likely to trigger these tipping points? So this research doesn't get quite to the point of the triggers, basically because it's just looking at how we might get to that triggering some of these changes is the logical next step of this work. So, like I said, this work comes from the understanding of how change happens in environmental systems, and basically that is that it's abrupt. It's not a nice smooth flow. When change happens, it happens really quickly. But for a long time, it looks like nothing is happening. So we've got this weird combination of being both like a boiling frog that doesn't realise that it's in a pan of ever-heating water because the change happens so slowly, and yet we've also got the potential of these black swan events, massive changes that we can't anticipate, or we don't think we can anticipate. That this process helps us do that. So we're both the boiling frog and the black swan all at the same time, which makes it really difficult to respond to, and why a methodology like positive tipping points can help us try and make sense of all this and get a handle on it. the work that I've been doing basically involved a big literature review of all the documentation, both within in the NHS and within the broader government and public sector, to look at resilience and risk within the context of climate change and digital systems. And what I was doing there basically was spotting the patterns, the common themes which were coming through, which were challenges within the system that we could address through positive tipping points. And essentially it came up with two areas, enhancing non-technical resilience and enhancing technical resilience. I mentioned non-technical resilience first, basically because that is known to be one of the more powerful points of intervention in a system. There's some great work by a systems thinker called Donella Meadows, who's shown that the most powerful point to leverage to intervene in a system, the highest leverage points, are about system goals and mindset of the system. Much more powerful than changing behaviours or specific physical changes, which are much less leverage over the system. So that's why I mentioned non-technical resilience first, because in that mapping exercise, what I found was most of the interventions are really around technical resilience. So it's changing things rather than changing our understanding of things, and the non-technical resilience is going to be much more powerful. So to look at that, where did we get to? The first positive tipping point was around decision makers and really getting to the point where they can prioritize resilience and make space for long-term thinking within day-to-day working, really hard-pressed environments where there's an awful lot of pressure, an awful lot of demands on time and resources and everything else. How can we create space to prioritize resilience and that long-term thinking by decision makers? The next one is about pushing that down and dissipating that through the system, through healthcare teams and through suppliers and other parts of the supply chain as well, so that climate resilience is viewed as essential and something that we're all part of, a shared responsibility. The next potential tipping point is around our response to incidents and being more effective in our response and having better learning from them. When Guy's and St Thomas's lost 2 data centres in the 2022 heatwave in London, one of the things that they tried to do to rectify the situation was spray their air conditioning condensers with water. Because they never practiced that, they didn't have a tap near where the where the condensers were, so they couldn't get water onto the condensers for several hours, and they didn't know that because it was just there on paper. They'd never practiced it. So this practice and learning is one of the important ways that we can enhance this non-technical resilience. A lot of the work looked at what happens through supply chains and supplier relationships, and this is the heart of one of the other positive tipping points, is this idea of cognitive debt. That when we outsource something, we're not just paying money for that, but we also incur a debt in terms of both the knowledge that we hold within the institution of how something is working, or where it's located, or how resilient it is, and the levers that we can pull to influence that. So we pay for goods and services that we receive in other ways beyond just financial terms, and cognitive debt is the catch-all term for that. 2 further ones here at the bottom really are about partnership relationships. So and one being about a reciprocal resilience network with local institutions, recognizing that if we all work together to be resilient to climate change, we are much more effective in doing that. And then closely related to that is this idea of nature-based resilience networks, and that's the idea of say you can reduce your urban heat effect and the excess heat that comes from sunlight through planting trees and natural shade and things like that. But if you do that alongside other local partners, you'll reduce the overall heat effect and be much more efficient and much more effective. Looking at the technical aspects of it, this is basically broken down over time, you might think of it. So so the first one is understanding what legacy risks we've got in the system, how resilient it is. And we can do that through things like developing better asset registers and better risk registers as well that specifically look at this in the context of climate change. I mentioned before about cognitive debt, and a key part of the process here is about this balance between resilience and complexity. And resilience is often sacrificed for the sake of either cost or because we've got suppliers who can come along and offer us services that we can't do ourselves. But the point is that we need to find a better balance, because often it's resilience that loses out within those equations. And then the third technical resilience point is understanding the impact of climate change overall. I mean, I talked about some of that. There's lots more in the paper about the likely impact of medium and long-term climate change, but also understanding the impact of climate incidents. You know, is this heat wave going to be as hot as it's predicted? Is that storm going to be as powerful as it's predicted? Where's it going to hit? And when it hits, and what data sources are we able to draw on to understand how it's working through, how impacting it's being. As I mentioned, the model works a lot with feedback loops. So for each one of those positive tipping points, what the report does is start to understand all the different feedback loops you might have. So, such as, you know, social contagion, the idea that we're social animals, so that we do the things that other people, our peers, do. So if you've got solar panels on your house, your neighbours are more likely to have solar panels on your house. The methodology also pushes us to look at learning by doing, how we get better at things the more we do. At percolation, a bit like social contagion, but it's the network effect of that, and that you can see that most clearly in things like viruses and when they move from being contained to being widespread. But there's lots of social examples of that in a positive way. Economies of scale and economies of networks, absolutely crucial feedback loops. I mean, basically, the more you do the more you make something or do something, or the more people doing it, the more effective or lower cost it becomes, and the more different technological add-ons to something, the more that reinforces it. Think smartphones. Once we've got a smartphone, apps can crowd into it, and then we're more likely to use our phone because of the apps that sit alongside it. And when you start to map all of this out, you get these complicated feedback loops, which start to enlighten us about, well, what are the opportunities to intervene within this system. And ultimately, that's where the next stage of this work would go. It's really saying, okay, so now we understand all of these different potential tipping points. Where's the most effective places to start to intervene? And the finding of the work is really that the most influential nodes are around mindset. It's around, you know, culture, priorities, goals, and the communication that gets that across, and how it takes other people within them. So that's where the work proposes we go next, which is how do you develop a program that helps bring this to life for people who are involved in it. So there you go. That's a quick overview of the potential of positive tipping points for climate resilience in NHS Digital Systems. If you've got any queries, dig into the report, but you're welcome to get in touch with me as well. I'm Tim Freno. You can reach me on email at hello@timfrenoand.co. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.